New York State spends $230 billion a year. New York is the same size, actually a little smaller population than Florida. Florida, 115 billion. So New York spends twice as much per person, twice as much total at the state level as Florida does. So Florida doesn't have to have an income tax. It's not like, well, where do you raise the money? They don't raise the money because they don't spend the money. There's $130 billion of money Florida doesn't spend that New York does. Now, the roads work in Florida better than New York. The schools work in Florida, as lousy as everybody's, but there's not any worse than New York. And the functions of government happen, but they have fewer bureaucrats, pay them not as much, make them work more hours in a week, and don't give them ridiculous gold-plated pensions. So what you're paying for in New York is the overpayment of government workers for the work done. It's not like they're building more bridges or more roads than Florida. So how do you get to be a low-tax state? Stop spending so much. Now, when you get to what are the really good ones and the really bad ones, the problem states, New York, over 10%. You're looking at New Jersey, around 10% top rate. Now Massachusetts is up to 9%. They were at 5%. They're one of the few blue states getting significantly worse during the Biden years. Washington State's getting bad, but the others have sort of said, we can't be getting crazier. We need to hold it down. Even California and New York. They're in a bad place now, but they haven't been getting worse in the last couple of years because they see too many of their high-income people leaving. California, about 13.5%. In Minnesota. Minnesota, you'd think they'd be sensible people in Minnesota, but evidently not. About 10% in Minnesota. The 10% plus club, California, Minnesota, New Jersey, New York, now Massachusetts. Now, Illinois, only 5% income tax. They tax everything else. But the income tax is not outrageous because it's a single rate tax, and they're scared to raise it because they have to raise it on everybody.
Fascinating. Okay, and what about on the other side? So we have Florida's at 0, with its, Miami being at 0. There's also these city taxes. Where are the other places that are like that?
7 states are at 0. Alaska, Nevada, Tennessee, South Dakota, Florida, Texas, Wyoming.
Really, you're saying that the reform, Americans for Tax Reform, the reform primarily has to be at the state and local levels? You're not seeing it happening at the federal level?
Well, we did get some reform during the 2 years when Trump had a Republican House and Senate. Then the corporate income tax, which was 35, which, by the way, was the highest in the world. Communist China only steals 25% of what a company makes. The United States was taking 35%. And then we wonder why we weren't competitive. Okay? Europe is in the 20s. We took ours to 21, which is good on corporate. Our individual rates remain too high at the national level as well. At the state level, though, that's where federalism is the friend of competent, limited government, because good states discipline bad states. Only truly stupid ideas can really only be passed at the national level. You could never have done Obamacare at the state level because it would have been too obvious. They actually, in Massachusetts, passed the equivalent of Obamacare when Dukakis was running for president. And then they said, see, we did national health care at the state level. After Dukakis lost, they repealed it because they knew it was destructive and wouldn't work and was just for show. But they then proceeded with Obamacare to put what Massachusetts had done at the national level. And then people, I don't know, the economy seems to have slowed down. How'd that happen? What was it? Well, we don't know. Could be anything. Global warming, probably. So at the state level, though, bad government shows up quickly compared to your neighbors. Vermont passed single-payer health care. Oh, wow. And then they repealed it because it was too destructive and didn't work and was non-competitive with the rest of the world. Now, but Bernie Sanders, who lives in Vermont and watched it fail at the state level, wants to impose it nationally. So all ideas should first be tested at the state level before they're allowed to get to Washington. If somebody says, I got a great idea, say, experiment on Rhode Island. Let us know how it turned out. There are 12 states right now where the governor and the legislature says, we're on the road to zero. We are going to zero. Iowa, first they went to a flat rate tax from 8.6% top rate down to 3.99. It's taken them 3-4 years to get that done. And then they're going to turn around, and they've announced, and then we're going to go to zero. So when revenue comes in above spending limits, you permanently drop the income tax rate. So instead of when revenue comes in above what you were going to spend, instead of deciding to give it to the teachers union, you say, we may give some to the teachers union, but the rest is going to go to all the people of the state in lower tax rates. North Carolina has been doing this for 12 years. They're on track to go to zero. Kentucky's voted to go to zero. Our friends in West Virginia have voted to go down to zero. Iowa's announced that they're getting their part way, and then they'll come back and vote to go the rest of the way. Next door, Nebraska said, we're going to do what Iowa's doing, except we're not going to 3.99 and then zero. We're going to 3.9, just under those spendthrifts in Iowa. That's what we're doing.
Right. So this is the good example being
Yes.
implemented. Right.
Arizona, they've gone to 2.5, and then they're going to zero. North Dakota, which had been leading the band, they decided we're going to go to 2.5 quickly on our way to zero. Arkansas has announced they're going to zero. North Dakota's announced they're going to zero. And they've started the process by cutting taxes. Mississippi voted 100-14 in their House to phase down to zero. They had a problem in the Senate, so they just went part way. But the governor wants to go to zero. The House wants to go to zero. We'll see if the Senate follows along. I think Mississippi will be at zero in the next 15 years. We're looking at 12 states that in the next 15 years will be at zero. So add the 15 new ones to the 7. New Hampshire will be at zero within 2 years. They've already passed the law to phase that in. They didn't tax wages in New Hampshire, but they tax dividends and interest. That's being phased out to zero. So we'll have 22 states at zero in the next 15 years. Idaho, surprisingly, hasn't joined the march to zero yet. Missouri hasn't. They should. They will. So these are solid red states that with a taxpayer structure that people want to go down lower. They just haven't joined the march yet. Indiana, Ohio.
So, you just made me think about these Trump era tax cuts, and they've been criticized a lot lately as empowering the rich, basically funneling money to the rich. They're not paying their share, this kind of stuff. When you look back on the balance of it, how do you view the effectiveness of those tax cuts, which I believe you were, both a proponent and somehow, influenced yourself? Yeah.
The Trump Republican tax cuts, the corporate rate drop was very helpful. It's why the economy is still doing okay, even with all the damage Biden's doing with inflation, because we're taxing at 21% instead of 35%, the corporate income. And we have full expensing, although that fades after a few years. So it's very good for economic growth. Trillions of dollars flowed back into the United States that had been stored overseas and was going to be invested in overseas because of those tax cuts and because we said we wouldn't punish you for bringing money back. Under Obama, if you brought the money back, the government would have a 35% tax on the money you brought back from France. Why? Yes, go invest in France. Don't invest here. It's better for you. That was U.S. policy under Obama and under previous presidents as well. So these were very pro-growth policies. The politicians like the corporate rate. Why do they like the corporate rate? They like the corporate rate, the tax, because they think somebody else pays it. They think, I don't pay that. People don't pay that. The companies pay that. Actually, companies, if you run a grocery store, and you raise taxes on a grocery store, the people who buy celery pay for that.